The first thing Wren noticed about the Valdhari commander was his patience, not the reptilian stillness that some of the older fleet officers mistook for discipline. The Valdari didn't hold still. They simply moved on frequencies humans couldn't see. Their throat sacs inflated and collapsed in rhythms that passed volumes between them, while their mouths remained sealed. What looked like patience was actually a very loud conversation that Wren happened to be excluded from. She had learned this 6 years ago in the second week of the Accord, and she had never forgotten it. The commander's name, as far as human vocal cords could approximate it, was something like Keth. He stood 3 meters tall in the negotiation hall of Waystation Kairos, which had been built specifically so that the ceiling could accommodate Valdari height without making them feel they were stooped. The architects had gotten the measurements wrong by 40 centimeters. Wren had watched Keth step through the entry arch with exactly 4 millimeters of clearance above his crest ridge. He had not commented. She had filed it away. The Valdari hegemony, Keth said in the slow-rolled vowels of standard that the translation implant gave him, acknowledges the presence of the human delegation. Wren set her case on the table. Across from her, 3 Valdhari in formal resin armor, all junior to Keth. Behind her, 2 aides who had no business being here, and who she had brought anyway, because an empty seat said you were weak, and an overcrowded room said you were afraid. She had 1 empty seat left side. By design. Delegate Commander Wren Vasquez, Earth Coalition, acknowledges the hegemony. She sat without being invited. Let's skip the call in response. You know why I'm here. The throat sacs moved. She didn't need to know what they were saying. The Valdari had controlled the Karath Passage for 600 years. The passage was the only navigable route through the Soren Nebula, without a 7-month detour that would bankrupt any shipping lane dependent on it. Human expansion into the outer colonies had been folding itself around that fact for 30 years, rerouting, rationing, paying the Valdari transit tax that amounted, when you ran the numbers honestly, to about 11% of the total trade value of 3 inhabited systems. Wren had been running those numbers honestly for a very long time. The hegemony, Keth said, is prepared to discuss modification of transit terms. I'm not here to discuss modification. The throat sacs moved again, faster this time. Delegate Vasquez. He tilted his head at the angle she had learned to read as the Valdari equivalent of a polite smile. The kind that came just before a door closing. The current framework. The current framework, she said, was written by your great-grandfather's administration during a period when humans were still calling our colony ships experimental. We have 47 functional colony systems now. We've mapped regions of space your surveys haven't touched, and we are still paying transit tax at a rate set when the hegemony considered us something between a novelty and a mild inconvenience. She folded her hands. So no, not modification, renegotiation, full terms. Or what passed for silence with Valdari in the room. Keth spoke at last. His standard was very careful, each word placed like a foot on uncertain ice. The delegate is confident in her position. The delegate, Wren said, has done her homework. She opened the case. Inside, a single data chip, matte gray. She pushed it across the table with 2 fingers. That contains the independent survey results for Corridor 7, the previously uncharted band 2 degrees south of the primary Karath lane, mapped by human survey vessels over the last 8 months. She let it sit there between them. It's navigable. It'll add 11 days to a standard transit, which means it's uneconomical for anything except ships running on extended fuel reserves, which is approximately 60% of our current outer colony fleet. She paused. We don't need your passage, Commander Keth. We built our own. The throat sacs went still. That was new. She had never seen them go still. This, Keth said slowly, is a significant claim. It's a documented fact. You're holding the verification data. He did not reach for the chip. She had expected this. The Valdari didn't touch first. Another thing she had learned early at some cost. Reaching for the chip before he was ready to would have meant she didn't trust him to examine it himself. She waited. After 7 seconds, she counted. His primary hand extended and took the chip. I will need time to verify. Of course, she stood. We're staying on Karis for the week. When you've run your checks, come find me. I'll be in the commissary at 0800 every morning. I drink terrible coffee, and I find it helps to have something to complain about while I negotiate. She picked up the empty case. Good afternoon, Commander. She was almost to the door when he spoke. Delegate. His voice had a different quality, not the formal standard role, something lower, closer to how they sounded in their own language. How long? The survey. How long were you planning this? Wren stopped. She didn't turn around. Since the second week of the accord, she said. When I figured out your throat sacs were a language, she walked out. Behind her, the throat sacs moved in silence she couldn't hear. The Corridor 7 survey had not, in truth, been Wren's idea alone. It had started as a side note in a quarterly brief from a young cartographer named Solis, who worked in the Coalition's Navigational Research Division, and who had, apparently, spent most of an 18-month posting on one of the outer relay stations charting the radiation fluctuation patterns of the Soren Nebula in his off hours. Because there was nothing else to do out there, and the patterns interested him. His brief had been 8 pages long. 7.5 pages covered standard navigational updates. Half a page, tucked near the end, noted that the radiation spikes in the southern approach band appeared to follow a periodic cycle, and that if the cycle held, there would be windows of navigable space, not consistently, not reliably, but regularly enough to be useful, if anyone cared to map them properly. Wren had read the brief on a Tuesday afternoon in her office in the Coalition's diplomatic wing, with the tail end of a Karath transit dispute still open on her secondary screen, and a cold cup of coffee at her elbow. She had read the half-page 3 times. She had looked up Solis's record, which was spotless and thoroughly unremarkable, and suggested no particular ambitions beyond his current posting. She had called him directly, no aid intermediary, which had apparently alarmed him considerably, and asked 2 questions. The first, how confident are you in the cycle data? His answer had been careful and precise, and had included 3 different caveats about sample size, but at its core it had been very. The second, how long to map it properly? His answer, after a longer pause, 6 months, with a dedicated team. 8 if they wanted the baseline data robust enough to hold up to independent verification. She had approved the mission the following morning, filed under General Navigational Survey Operations, funded through a discretionary research budget that nobody paid close attention to, crewed by volunteers from the Outer Colony Fleet who had specifically signed up for the long and the difficult. She had told Solis to take 8 months and do it right. She had told no one else, not because she was hiding it. The mission was on the books, available to anyone who looked, but because talking about it before it was done would have made it a plan rather than a fact. And facts were much harder to argue with than plans. 8 months later, Solis had calmed her at 0200 station time with a map that worked and a voice that was trying very hard to be professionally calm and not quite managing it. She had listened to the whole report. Then she had thanked him, told him the survey would be named Solis Corridor 7 in the official registry, and gone back to sleep. She had laid awake for approximately 40 minutes first. The crew they had lost, the survey ship Patience's Run, hull breach in a spike event in month 6, 3 crew, had been volunteers, had known the risks, had signed the waivers. It did not make it right. It made it a weight she was going to carry, and she knew the difference. The map existed because they had kept going after the hull breach. That was on the record, too. She had made sure of it. The commissary at 0800 was exactly as bad as she had promised. The coffee was synthesized from a base stock that had been fine-tuned for human physiology, but not human taste, and the result had all the bitterness of the real thing, with a chemical aftertaste that sat at the back of the throat. Wren drank it black because she had a rule. Don't hide what something is, not coffee, not survey data, not negotiation positions. Her aide, a young man named Corin, who was 3 years out of the Coalition's diplomatic corps, and still wore his optimism like a clean uniform, watched her drink it with the expression of someone who wanted to ask a question but had learned better. She decided to help him. Ask, she said. What if they don't come? They'll come. What if they've already started building their own countermeasures? New scan arrays in the corridor, interference nets. Corin, she set the cup down. The Vuldari have held the Karath Passage for 600 years because it was genuinely the only way through the nebula. That's not arrogance, that's geography. When you're the only path, you don't need to plan for alternatives, because no one builds alternatives. They never thought we'd do it. Why not? Because the survey requires running ships into regions of the nebula that have radiation spikes every 16 days on an irregular cycle. It took us 8 months, and we lost 2 probes and 1 crewed ship. She looked at her coffee. The Vuldari risk calculus doesn't account for that kind of loss rate as an acceptable mission parameter. Their culture doesn't. She picked the cup back up. We brought the families of the crew home ourselves, named the survey corridor after the lead cartographer, and then we finished the job. She drank. That's the part they didn't predict. Not the math, the stubbornness. Corin was quiet for a moment. Did you know it would work? He asked. When you started the survey. Wren looked at the far wall of the commissary, where someone had hung a print of the Carith Nebula as seen from the first human ship to approach it. All blue-green cloud and silent fire. Beautiful and impassable, or so everyone had thought. No, she said, but we had to find out. Commander Keth arrived at 0847. He sat down across from her without the usual call and response, which she took as a good sign. He had brought no aids. She took that as an even better one. He placed the data chip on the table between them. The survey is accurate, he said. Yes. Corridor 7 has 3 navigable windows per standard month, each lasting 36 hours. The radiation spikes are predictable within 6-hour margins once you have enough baseline data. He paused. Your survey generated that baseline data. Yes, the survey data is now in our system. He paused. Because the chip interfaced with our verification network. Yes, she let the smallest possible version of a smile show. The ship schematics for the next 3 years of Valdhari construction projects are a nice bonus. Not why I did it, but I'll take it. The throat sacs moved. She watched them carefully. Something different about the rhythm, not the fast flutter of alarm, not the slow roll of formal speech. Slower than that, considering. You are a difficult individual, Keth said finally. I've been told. The hegemony will negotiate full terms, she nodded. She didn't say she had known he would say that, because it would have been true but unkind. And unkind was not the same as useful. I want 3 things, she said. No transit tax, joint maintenance rights on the Carith Lane infrastructure, and a permanent human presence on Waystation Karis. She tapped the table once. In exchange, we give you full access to the Corridor 7 survey data, and we share any future survey work in the Nebula region. It's a partnership. You keep your passage. We keep ours. Nobody owns the stars. Keth was silent for a long moment. His throat sacs moved in the slow, considering rhythm. Why a permanent presence, he asked. On Karis. That is the unexpected one. Because, Wren said, 6 years ago I stood in a negotiating hall, and I understood for the first time that your throat sacs are a language. And in 6 years of working with the hegemony, I have learned to read maybe 8% of it. She met his eyes, dark, layered, compound in a way human eyes weren't, and she had taught herself to hold the gaze because looking away had cost her twice. I don't want to negotiate with people I only know 8% of. I want to learn the rest. She spread her hands, and I want your people to learn us. Because the next crisis, and there will be a next crisis, Commander, there's always a next crisis. I don't want it to happen between strangers. The throat sacs were still again. You planned this, Keth said, for 6 years, parts of it. Some of it I made up this week. She finally pushed the coffee cup aside. That's the thing about humans. We plan, but we also improvise. It makes us very difficult to predict. Keth looked at her for a long time. She let him look. I accept, he said, in principle. The details require further discussion. I have all week. I will arrange a more suitable meeting space. He paused. The ceiling in the current negotiation hall is inadequate. I noticed. He tilted his head in the angle she now knew was something like appreciation. The architects were given incorrect measurements. I know. I had them corrected 6 years ago when I first came aboard Karis. It took until last month for the maintenance request to be approved. She stood. Welcome to bureaucracy. You'll get used to it. The full negotiation took 4 days. The sticking point was not the transit tax, which the hegemony conceded by the end of day 1 once it became clear that Corridor 7 would genuinely be viable within the next 2 years of fleet upgrade cycles. The sticking point was the permanent human presence. The Valdhari had an instinctive, deep-seated discomfort with long-term guests that Wren had known about but had underestimated. Not the fact of a human presence, but the specific social weight of permanence. In Valdhari culture, permanently settling somewhere meant a claim. She had read it wrong. She found this out on day 2, when one of Keth's aides explained it to Corin in a hallway outside the new meeting room, while Keth and Wren were both pretending to review the same maintenance cost projections they had both already read. She heard it secondhand from Corin at lunch. She sat with it through the afternoon. She went back in at 1400 and changed the term. Not permanent, she said. Rotating. A posting. Human representatives on a multi-year cycle, renewable by mutual agreement. No fixed claim. She paused. Same weight, different frame. Keth had looked at her across the table for a moment, and she had watched his throat sac move in a single, quick pulse that she had never seen before and couldn't translate. She asked him about it later, at the end of day 3, when the formal positions had all been established and they were both tired enough to stop performing. "What does that mean?" she asked. "The single fast pulse. You did it when I changed the permanence term." He was quiet for a moment. His throat sac was still. "It is," he said slowly, "a very old expression. Difficult to put in standard," he seemed to consider. "The closest I can offer you seem more than I expected." Wren looked at her hands. 8%, she said. "Working on 9. The agreement was signed at 900 on day 4 in the newly renovated negotiation hall, with 44 centimeters of clearance above Keth's crest ridge. The architects had gotten the revision right this time. Wren had double-checked the measurements herself the previous evening. She did not tell anyone she had done this. It would have seemed like a small thing to most people. It wasn't. The crisis came 14 months later, and it was nothing like she had imagined. She had imagined a border dispute or a resource conflict, or one of the slower emergencies that diplomatic channels were designed for. What actually happened was a Valdari deep survey vessel going silent in the outer region of the Soren Nebula, a region that overlapped with the edges of the human survey corridor. The vessel had been running a geological assessment. It stopped transmitting on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the Valdari had scrambled 2 military frigates to the area. By Friday, the coalition had scrambled one because the Corridor 7 survey vessels operated in the region, and the silence might mean debris field, and debris field might mean danger to human ships. By Saturday, Wren was on the coalition frigate Persistence, 12 hours from the search area, sitting across from a comm screen showing Commander Keth's face. "The hegemony," he said, in a register that had dropped back into formal standard, "appreciates the coalition's concern for the missing vessel." "Let's not," she said. A pause. His throat sac moved once, softly. "Let's not," he agreed. "What do you know?" Last telemetry showed a navigable anomaly they were investigating. Unusual mass readings for the region. The geological sensor array would have pulled them off their planned route to take a closer look. He paused. "It is not unprecedented. Our survey vessels do not vanish." "No." She looked at her own data. "But the Corridor 7 team found 3 anomalies on their last survey run that weren't on any Valdari charts. Deep in the nebula. So deep you wouldn't have mapped them without the radiation window timing data we shared last year. Any of those would produce unusual mass readings." He was quiet. "We've been in your survey data," she said. "Not looking for intelligence, actually using it. We found the gaps." She turned her screen to show him the anomaly markers. "One of those sites is 11 hours from your vessel's last position." The throat sac moved in the considering rhythm, then stopped. "You believe our vessel is at that site," Keth said. "I think it's possible. Your geological team would have been drawn to it. And if the anomaly is what I think it is, some kind of density inversion in the nebula clouds, the communications blackout is explainable, not catastrophic. Just interference. The frigates can reach that site in 9 hours. The Persistence can reach it in 7. She held his gaze. "I'd like to go first. If the crew is alive, they'll need medical support faster than the frigates can provide." And she stopped. "And," he said, "and the hegemony sending 2 military frigates as a first response is going to look to the outer system monitoring networks like a military mobilization, which it isn't. But it'll look like one, and that's the kind of thing that starts different crises." She kept her voice even. "Let me go first. I'll calm you in real time. If the crew is injured, I have a full medical bay. If the vessel needs to be towed, the Persistence has the docking clamps for it." She paused. "If it's something else, if there's an actual threat out there, I'll tell you immediately, and your frigates can be on top of us in 2 hours." Keth looked at her from the screen for a long moment. Behind him she could see the unfamiliar geometry of a Valdari command bridge, all curved surfaces and no right angles. "You're asking the hegemony," he said carefully, "to trust a human vessel with the first contact in a situation involving missing Valdari crew." "Yes, because it is more efficient. Because we've been planning for this for 14 months. She leaned forward slightly. "Because this is exactly the kind of crisis I told you would come, and this is why I wanted our people to know each other before it did, Commander Keth. Do you trust me?" The throat sac moved. The single fast pulse, the one she still hadn't fully translated but was starting to. 7 hours, he said. "Calm me in real time. I'll even let you watch the medical bay feeds if the crew needs treatment. That is," he paused, "that is not necessary." "No," she agreed. but it's the kind of thing you offer. The Valdari survey vessel was exactly where Wren had predicted it would be. It was also in considerably better shape than anyone had feared. The density inversion in the nebula cloud had produced a localized communications blackout in a bubble approximately 40,000 kilometers across, and the Valdari geological team, 14 crew and 2 xenogeologists, had been happily collecting some of the most significant mass density anomaly readings in the outer Soren region while everyone outside the bubble was quietly panicking about their silence. The Persistence came alongside the survey vessel at 0330 station time. Wren was on the bridge when the comms reopened. Reading multiple contacts, identify. Survey vessel Keth's name rendered in human phonetics, she said, butchering it somewhat. This is Delegate Ren Vasquez of the Earth Coalition vessel Persistence. You've been in a comms blackout for approximately 50 hours. No casualties reported here. Commander Keth of the Valdari Hegemony is currently watching this channel. He is very glad you are not dead, although he will phrase it more formally than that. A long silence from the survey vessel. Then, in careful but excellent standard, Delegate Vasquez. The survey team is intact. We were unaware of any communications difficulty. I know. The anomaly you found, the density inversion, it creates a localized blackout. We found 3 of these on our Corridor 7 surveys. We should have flagged the possibility in the shared data. She paused. I'll add it to the next update. You came to find us. You were lost. We had a faster ship. She said it simply, because it was simple. There was nothing complicated about it. When something needed doing, you did it. She heard very faintly the sound of something moving on the survey vessel bridge. Then quiet. Then, after a long moment, we are grateful, Delegate. She opened the channel to Keth. He was there instantly, which meant he had been watching the entire exchange even before she had formally opened the feed. She decided not to mention this. Your crew is safe, she said. All 14 plus the xenogeologists. The anomaly data they've collected is apparently significant. Keth's throat sac moved in a long, slow pulse she had never seen before. She watched it carefully. Filed it. Thank you, he said, in standard, without the formal framing. They would have figured it out eventually, she said. They're good surveyors. We just got there first. Nevertheless, she nodded. Commander, we're going to have to figure out how to mark these blackout zones on the shared charts. Both our survey teams are going to be working in that region. I'd like to do a joint cartography session. Get one of your xenogeologists and one of ours in the same room with the data. She paused. Or the same ship if you can arrange it. You want, Keth said slowly, to embed our scientists together. I want your people to know our people. In the field. Not in a negotiation hall. She looked at the survey vessel on her screen, still lit against the nebula. The data from that anomaly site is extraordinary. It would be a shame to study it separately. The slow pulse again. I will arrange it, he said. The joint cartography project began 8 weeks later and lasted in various forms for 3 years. During that time, Wren made 4 more trips to Waystation Karis. She learned enough of the Valdari throat language to recognize approximately 30 distinct expressions, which the Valdari xenolinguists assigned to the project, who had been openly skeptical that a human could achieve phoneme perception in that frequency range at all, considered remarkable. Wren considered it a start. The xenogeologists shared a ship for 6 months mapping the deep Soren anomaly cluster. They produced a joint paper that became, without anyone quite planning it, the first formally co-authored scientific work in the history of human-Valdari relations. The Valdari xenogeologist, whose name transliterated as something close to Athol, eventually learned to drink commissary coffee black. She described it to Wren as clarifying, in the specific tone that Wren had learned to read as the Valdari equivalent of someone admitting something had changed their mind. Corin was promoted twice. He stopped wearing his optimism like a clean uniform and started wearing it like a well-used tool, which was considerably more useful. Solus was offered the lead position on the next phase of the Deep Soren survey. He accepted. The mission name in the registry was, at his own request, Patience's Run 2. The 3 who hadn't come home had been friends of his, which was something Wren hadn't known when she approved his original mission. He had told her at the promotion ceremony, not as a complaint and not asking for anything, just because he thought she should know. She had nodded. She had not looked away. The transit tax was officially nullified in the 3rd month after the initial agreement. Wren attended the ceremony remotely, because she was on a transport in the outer colonies at the time. Keth sent her a data chip afterward, containing a brief message in Standard and one sentence in raw Valdari throat language that the translation implant rendered as untranslatable. She played it 17 times before she figured out, from context and the 30 expressions she had learned, that it was something close to. The path was already there. You merely cleared it. She thought about that for a long time. She had not cleared the path. The path through the Sora Nebula had always been there, latent, waiting for someone stubborn enough to map it through 8 months of radiation spikes and lost probes, and one crew that didn't come home. The path through 600 years of transit fees and throat sack negotiations and incorrect ceiling heights had always been there too. Both required the same thing, the willingness to go in when the way was unclear and the outcome was uncertain, to take the losses and keep the charts and pass the data to whoever came next. That was the thing about humans. It wasn't that they didn't understand risk. It was that they had a peculiar relationship with it. They did the math, found the odds unacceptable, and then went anyway, because not going felt worse than the alternative. The Valdari risk calculus simply didn't have a variable for that. It had no notation for the kind of species that looked at an 8-month death probability survey in a radiation-spiked nebula corridor and called it worth trying. They had thought, for 600 years, that the Karath passage was the only way through. They had held it carefully, taxed it fairly by their own understanding, made themselves essential. It had never occurred to them that the other side of the equation was not holding a passage, but simply not needing one. Or, rather, not stopping until they found another. Wren had a framed copy of Solus's original half-page brief in her office. She had framed the caveat-heavy, sample-size qualified, professionally hedged version, not a cleaned-up one. She had done it because she wanted to remember that the thing that had changed the whole calculation had been an 8-line observation buried at the end of a quarterly report by a young cartographer with too much time on his hands on an outer relay station. And if she had not read to the end of that report, none of it would have happened. That was also the thing about humans. They had approximately 8,000 ways to fail, and most of the time they did fail. And the few times things worked, it was usually because someone read to the end of the document. When the next crisis came, 14 months after that, in a dispute over Valdari mining rights at the mouth of Corridor 7, Wren sent Keth a message before the formal dispute process opened. She was on Karis when she sent it. She had a permanent office there, on a rotating posting, same weight, different frame. She could see the nebula from the window on clear days. All blue-green cloud and silent fire. The message was brief. We need to talk before this gets formal. I'm in the commissary at 0800. The coffee is still terrible. He arrived at 0802. He had, she noticed, never arrived at 0800 exactly. Always slightly after. She had filed it and never asked. Some things you learned by accumulation rather than by asking. He sat down. No aids. No formal framing. The mining application, he said. Is it strategic? She asked. To create leverage on the corridor? No. It is private consortium. The mineral assays are genuine. He paused. I checked before coming. So did I. She looked at him. So we both know it's not the problem. The coalition objection is the problem. The coalition objection is fear dressed as aggression, which is the worst kind of problem, because both sides feel justified and neither side is actually saying what they want. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. It was the same synthesized bitterness it had always been. What they want is a right of passage guarantee in the development agreement. Not the application killed. They just don't know how to ask for it in language that doesn't sound like an ultimatum. And what does the hegemony want? To develop a legitimate mineral site without being treated like you're mounting a strategic encirclement. She looked up. Which you're not. His throat sac moved in the long, slow pulse she had finally fully translated. Have the consortium's legal team contact our shipping interests directly, she said, before the formal process opens. Person to person, not through diplomatic channels. And I'll get the objection language revised to what they actually mean. She paused. We can have this done before it becomes an incident. That is more efficient, he said. That's not why I'm doing it. She looked at the nebula through the window, the familiar blue-green cloud, the survey corridor threading through it, invisible from any distance but there. The next crisis after this one, neither of us is going to see coming. We're never going to see them coming. But we can make sure that when they happen, we're not starting from strangers. She turned back to him. That's what I'm doing. His throat sac moved in a rhythm she'd been cataloging for 3 years. the slow pulse, longer this time, and then the single quick one after it. She had the slow pulse now. The quick one, in that combination, was new. "What does that mean?" she asked. The two together. He was quiet for a moment the way he was quiet when he was deciding how much Standard could carry. "The slow pulse," he said. "You know. This is right. This is how it should be." "Yes. The quick one after." He paused. "In formal register, it is untranslatable. In the informal. In this context," he considered. "Something close to. I did not expect to be here, in this conversation. With this person." He tilted his head in the appreciation angle. "It is not a complaint." Ren looked at him. 3 years of Keth, across negotiation tables and comm screens, and one very long 7-hour flight through a nebula. 44 centimeters of ceiling clearance, a data chip with ship schematics, a survey crew who had kept going after a hull breach. "Neither did I," she said. She raised her coffee cup. He did not drink. The Valdari did not consume in informal settings with non-Valdari, one of the 17 cultural points she had memorized in the first month. But he inclined his head in the gesture she had come to read as acknowledgement. "I'll have the consortium contact made by end of week," he said. "I'll have the revised language to you by Thursday. Then this is resolved. This one." She drank, still terrible. "The next one will be something completely different." "Yes," he said. And then, in the careful way he had of navigating Standard when he was choosing precision over fluency, "I find I am less concerned about the next one than I was a year ago." 30 expressions, she said. "Working on 31, he said. She almost laughed. She let herself a small version of it. He watched her do it with the expression she had cataloged 17 times and had finally identified as the Valdari version of the same thing. The involuntary, unplanned acknowledgement that something has landed correctly, that the math works out, that the path improbably is there. Outside the commissary window, the nebula held its cloud and its fire. Somewhere in it, the survey corridor ran its invisible thread. Somewhere beyond that, Solus and his team were taking Patience's Run 2 into the deep anomaly cluster, naming things that had never been named, adding to charts that both sides could now read. Nobody owned the stars. That had always been true. The hard part was not declaring it. The hard part was acting like it, consistently, across every small and ordinary interaction. The ceiling height, the data chip, the terrible coffee, the question asked, and the answer waited for, the 7-hour flight through a nebula toward a crew who might or might not be alive. And again tomorrow. And again however many times it took. That was the thing about humans. They understood the cost. They ran the numbers. They went anyway. They always, eventually, went anyway. Ren finished her coffee and stood. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," Keth agreed. She walked out of the commissary into the station corridor, past the print of the nebula on the wall. The old one, the first approach image, beautiful and impassable, and already proven wrong. She did not look at it. She had seen it enough. There was a revised objection to draft, and a mining consortium to quietly redirect, and somewhere in her queue an 8th-month survey report from a young geologist on a new relay station who had noticed something interesting about the deep Soren mass readings, and had buried it, characteristically, in the last half page of a quarterly brief. She had already read to the end. She was already planning.